In 2016, we had finished a Christmas movie for BYU Television, and we started talking with them about ideas for another one. And I remember the night I came across the story of the prison violin, and it hit me. I turned to my wife and I said, I found it.
It was a story he'd found of Clair Cline and his experience in the Stalag Luft prison camp where he made the violin that he made. And it was the first I had heard of the story, and we all kind of got excited about it.
You know, somebody in a very dark situation in this POW camp in the height of the war, finding some way to hold on to hope. And in this case, building a violin, of all crazy things to try and do when you're not in a prison camp. And just this story of hope and perseverance. And so that was all I really had to go off of. But that was a core. That was something I knew that we could build from and create a great story and hopefully discover more of the story.
Here with the writer. Writer's on set.
Writing this script was really a rewarding experience on a couple different levels, but probably at the deepest level was because of my personal connection to it. My dad was a B-24 bomber pilot, and although he wasn't ever shot down, thankfully, I grew up hearing his stories. And so, you know, when I had the opportunity to write this story and flesh out the true historical story that happened, and also add into it other fictional characters, but putting them into a non-fictional setting. One of the characters that I put in there was a co-pilot named Whitaker, and they called him WHIT, and that was my dad. Just kind of a really cool thing now to see the young actor that's playing this character who carries my dad's name, and just seeing what he's doing with it. It's a great experience.
Rolling and action.
Hey, Whit.
Cline.
You all right?
My ankle.
My grandfather always used to tell amazing stories of that period in time. So it was something that really interested me, and the character as well. He's kind of, I wouldn't say he's the comic relief, but he's a cheeky kind of, it's that kind of rebel without a cause kind of character.
And action! Oh, okay, all right, okay. I can walk. Whoa, all right, come on now. Okay, where are we going? Make a decision. Okay, all right, where are we going? Hey, see you later. Okay.
I'm surprised that this one hasn't been done, because it's just an amazing story. It's something that when you read it, you're like, this can't be true. So, I mean, all those things put together just made the whole project very appealing.
Clair Cline was a violinist, and although he's going through so much, Clair Cline wants to play music. And I think when people are in need, or they look to him possibly. It's difficult for me to sort of talk about how they feel about me, but I just know that in the script, he steps up, and he actually makes decisions. And I think that's what a leader is about, you know? He's not afraid to sort of, this is where I stand, and I'm willing to fight for it.
You know, this is an ensemble picture, and so it was important to find, a cast of actors that we'd hoped would look good together and gel together, and we were blessed with wonderful talent, in Danny Betts, in Barney, in Elliot, in Callum, and Ethan, Kai, Matthias, Urs. I mean, I could go on and on. I mean, we had a wonderful cast, and each one of these actors just made that character so much more than, is on a page.
Lawrence Packer. He's the senior American officer in the camp, where other stories often focused on the kind of, we're going to keep fighting, we're going to get the Germans, and we're going to try and escape. They're constantly trying to escape and constantly trying to undermine and constantly trying to erode the power that is there. He, I think, was much more tactical, realized that the way to get his men through it was to play the game and keep under the radar as much as possible. He wasn't organizing loads of escapes. He felt that I just need to keep my men here, play the game as long as we can, don't antagonize these guys, and maybe we'll get out of this alive.
With Vinny, when I read the script, I knew who he was straight away.
Vinny, I'm from New York.
Clair Cline, Minnesota.
Yeah, huh. It's a pretty name.
He uses humor to cheer people up. He doesn't do it for himself, I don't think. Not to say that he's not a very happy person, but he's got a very interesting character arc in the whole film.
I think with the character of Jack, what you see is not necessarily exactly what he's like. He's seen a lot in his life. He's an RAF pilot, he's an officer, he's been through it. He wants to prove his masculinity. He wants to say, you know, I'm the man. We Brits could have you any day of the week. And although he can fight, it's all a way of coping. It's a coping mechanism with the kind of trials that he's experiencing.
Whit, that's you over there. Cline, that's your billet. And, Frank. Well, I don't know what Frank does besides lie in his bunk all day.
Frank Romero, he's a lieutenant. He's sort of the recluse of the group. He's a cynic. He's very introverted. Very much towards the beginning of the story, he doesn't get involved with sort of anyone else unless it's trading. And I think sort of as the story progresses, he sort of comes to realize that you know he needs to work together with the others really in order to really make things right, especially as you know as the story progresses and things start to heat up.
You will find it.
KLAUS, he's very into his career in the army, and I think he is a little bit frustrated. So many German officers felt this in the beginning of the 40s. For him, the Americans are enemies, yeah. But I think he has also some respect for them, for the officers.
You salute.
No, I outrank you.
Georg is a young German soldier. Well, he's not a soldier anymore. He's a master sergeant. So he made some kind of little career, and he wants to get higher and higher in the Wehrmacht. But on the other hand, he is very lucky to be with the Americans, and he likes to be with them and enjoys trading with them and make some fun with them and have time together with them.
Well, in this movie, it becomes clear that music is one of the characters. And when you're going into production, before anything's filmed, you have great hopes for what the music will be, always. But in this case, it became clear that we were going to need a theme that represented the song that Claire played for Anne before he left, before he was deployed. And that was going to need to be created from scratch by a composer.
We needed a composer that understood character and understood the heart of just human emotion and could bring that through the score and have it become a character in the film. And Mark Isham, he's incredible. You know, the scores that he has done, whether it's October Sky, A River Runs Through It. I mean, these are films that to this day people list as some of the most moving and emotive scores that they've heard.
When you have a story that reflects really a true life experience of that phenomena, it's worth being a part of. That was my initial reaction. And then I read the script and it all worked. It all read really well, and I said, sign me up. What I decided to do. The initial challenge was that piece of music that had such a profound effect on people and the characters in the story had to be written before the film was shot. It's not really typical for a composer to have to write music that's so connected to the shooting of scenes, unless of course you're doing a musical, but this has a bit of a characteristic of that. This is almost a musical in that sense, that unless you really believe that Cline is playing this stuff, the movie might not really sort of gel.
Okay, playback please. It's 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. I thought I would have lots of time to cast an actor who could learn the instrument at least enough to play the songs in the film. However, what happened with us is our deadline just was so tight that when we cast Jack Ashton, he literally only had a few days to prepare for the role. So we decided to play a couple of movie tricks. One of them was to have a violin player, a very accomplished violin player, be a hand double. And so we did a lot of filming of just the hands and the neck of the violin and the bow going across the violin. And oftentimes we'd come off the back of his head, or we'd follow this hand up. And there were lots of times where we'd see Jack Ashton lift the bow up and go like this, and then we'd cut to one of those shots across the violin to one of the other characters that was back here. So the good thing about that was that we have lots of good coverage. The bad thing was it gave Jack Ashton pretty much a nervous breakdown, because he had the stress of trying to learn to pretend to play the violin within just a few days.
You know, it takes years to perfect the violin, and I had a couple of weeks.
Every time, 1, 2.
But I've had a fantastic teacher. He's a great man. He's just a character from something, I don't know what, but he'd be brilliant. He's made it fun, and we have a laugh. You know, we've done the best that we could do with the time that was given. It's like a relationship with the violin, because he goes through the fact that, you know, he builds it so it means everything to him, and then it's taken away, and he almost dies for it, because he cares that much about it, and then it's given back to him and he can barely look at it. And that's sort of like a relationship with somebody that's broken your heart, isn't it? You know, it's like, I'd do anything for you, but now you've hurt me. I can't even look at you. But you know, and eventually he and the violin sort of make up again, and then he plays it at the end. You know, and obviously it's all connected to his relationship with WHIT and all that sort of stuff. You know, so it's an ever present in the film, whether it's cerebral or physical. Yeah.
Okay.
This is first shot, first take.
Quiet, please.
Here we go. Action.
And action car.
Shot 1. Let's keep this train going.
It's interesting, my job as producer, one of the vital components is having a good line producer and production entity. And, you know, taking a picture to, you know, Lithuania, to Eastern Europe can seem, that could be a little daunting, you know, but Gary Tuck and Baltic Film Services, I mean, they've just an incredible production company that, you know, just vast experience. They did BBC War and Peace and Defiance, and just a number of pictures, and they know their stuff.
The crews there, especially the craftspeople, the production designers and art directors and wardrobe and hair and makeup, all of those people create just masterful artistry. I've been there before. I've had a great experience. We wanted to go back this time because of the need to find locations that looked like World War II Germany. And we weren't disappointed.
Well, we're starting day 2. We're in the forest somewhere, or at least we're trying to make it look like we're in the forest. As you see, there is nothing here that looks like a forest. It looks like an open farm, but in the shot, it's gonna look like a forest because that's all we see. Cut, circle,
That was
move on.
fantastic.
Good job, guys.
Thank you, artists.
We're gonna bring them all down here to this barn back here, and then they're gonna see the destruction that comes from the other side of their
If this one goes
service.
terribly.
Go fast, guys.
Beautiful ambience happening. Dogs, roosters, birds. Yeah, makes it easy.
The first few days in any job is so overwhelming. New faces, everyone, you know, you want to get it right. So if those first few days are like actiony stuff, it's brilliant, because, you know, you've got to run around and stuff, and it's like your first few days at school, you know. If you could just do PE on your first day at school, that would be amazing, wouldn't it?
We did have the luxury on this film to film mostly chronologically. So day 1 is the first scene of the story that you see, and we finished the last scene on the last day of shooting. That doesn't always happen, but with this film being so confined to a few locations, it worked out to be that way.
And action.
This is one of our visual effects shots. So the idea is that the bomb went through the house and blew up right here, burned out this cool truck that the art department found. And this is where Cline and WHIT are kind of connecting that what they do up in the sky and dropping bombs isn't necessarily just stopping the bad guys. It isn't just taking out the war machine. And occasionally there's some collateral damage and they miss.
Meine Mutter. Meine Schwester.
You! Zurück, Junge!
Instead of coming out, I want to do one of these.
Yeah.
So this was the first time Wes Johnson and I worked together. And so when we first sat down, we'd go through scene by scene and we made shot lists. And then he'd always say to me, okay, now we've covered the scene, now let's uncover it. And I would sit there and go, okay, what do you want to do? He'd say, what if we turn the camera sideways right here? Or what if we show half of Cline's face?
Hats off to Adam and to Wesley Johnson for coming up with angles and for camera movements that I think really kept the barrack itself alive and it made it visually interesting. As we move around with the characters, it never felt stagnant.
The limitation is the opportunity. So the fact that I only have this has actually made me work harder to dial it in and make something special, and it will be great.
So when Cline's testing out the wood glue, it's good. He says it's good and everybody cheers. We push the camera in quickly and then we cut to the boxing ring and we pull out. Those were shot several weeks apart from each other. But Wes had the idea as we were sitting there doing the shot list, what if we did this? Just imagine the energy. If we go in, they're all cheering and then we come right back out and he's pulling the gloves down from his face. And it was just a great piece of artistry. Well, people have asked me how you recreate a prison camp. It's a little bit tricky because you want to be accurate, but you also don't have an unlimited amount of funds. So what we did is we found a compound that was surrounded by some old buildings that were really, they had a lot of character. And there was a space down to the west side of it, I think, that was open, that I knew we could build 3 or 4 walls of barracks, and then with computer-generated images, we could extend the camp so that it looked like it was, you know, many buildings of barracks. The way the lights hung from the buildings and would just swing in the wind, that was just really eerie to me, and I just thought that was awesome. So those are the kinds of things that, you know, you try and put into a prison camp.
With our art director, we started, you know, talking about, okay, we could place the barracks in these different positions and, you know, where we could place the guard towers and, you know, what was once an empty field, we just started seeing, okay, we could stage this. This is where the boxing match could take place. This is where the cooler could be. And it was exciting. I love that part of it.
Stahlegloofs were for officers. In this case, they were for Air Force officers and couldn't be used for hard labor. And so we wanted it to have the feel of what those places felt like, and that's what we tried to create.
When I got the part, I told my dad, and his father had fought in the Second World War and had been in the fall of Singapore and been a Japanese prisoner of war for 3 years. And my dad said to me, how are you going to do that? How are you going to prepare for this part? You know, because his father had never spoken about it. This had been so traumatic. He'd come back kind of 5 stone lighter than he was. He hadn't eaten anything, and this was an experience that he buried. Like a lot of people who experienced Japanese prisoner of war camps, they never spoke about it. It was too traumatic. And he said to me, how are you going to prepare for that? How are you going to get to that kind of level of suffering? And I said, well, this is different. These camps were so different from those because this wasn't about starving people. This wasn't about grinding them down. This was just about keeping them in a certain place. So the main obstacle that you face in these prisoner of war camps as an Allied soldier is boredom.
Whatever it takes to fight the boredom.
I could use a little boredom about now.
Amen to that.
That's because you're daft. You don't know anything yet. It's like Chinese water torture. They strap you down, and they let a little drop of water drip right in the middle of your forehead, over and over. And at first you're thinking, If this is all they've got, then keep it coming, lads. Because you're daft. And you don't know anything yet.
And so the barracks, they were basically just corrals where these officers were kept. And it was an option for them to choose how to spend their time. In fact, part of the game that was being played on them was to try and make them bored and to feed them erroneous pieces of news so that they just would get more and more frustrated with being held captive.
We know that the war ended in 45. You know, we know that it ended in September of 45. So they've only got to hang on that long. They never knew that. They're thinking I could be here for years and years and years, and then what? You know, and that must have been so tough.
A lot of them talked about the fact that that was the hardest part, was not knowing if they were going to be home by Christmas, or if they were going to be home in 5 years or in 10 years, or if they ever were going to see their loved ones again. With all the cold and the hunger and you know, the maltreatment and all those kinds of things, the hardest part for them, most of them will say, was not knowing.
Once you get everything built, then you add the symbols. So in this case, the Nazi flag, you raise that up on a flagpole and the whole thing feels different. And we all had that experience walking on set and looking at that flag up there and just going, wow, this is like we're transported to this other time in history.
When you stand on those big sets, and it's a big, huge set, and it's even just the way it's positioned and the old buildings around it. You know, you're not looking at loads of honey wagons and trailers and stuff. It's all just the geography of the place means that you just feel you're there.
The grandeur of the ambition of this film, you know, the set is immaculate. And, you know, as an actor, you go on into every job and you have an idea of what it's going to be like. And it exceeded what I thought it was going to be.
You can't beat when it's around you because it does all the acting for you. You know, you stood out in this prison camp with barbed wire, and you don't need to act like you're trapped in this camp. You genuinely feel it, and you've got the cold weather hitting you, and you know you're there. You don't need to act being cold.
Thank you for that.
And action.
What's your beef, Lieutenant? Why don't you make a little effort to get along with the other guys?
We had the scene with Frank where he was sitting on the stairs of the barracks and Pac comes over to him and says, "What's going on with you? You know, why are you so closed off to everybody?" And we had many iterations of that scene, and Russ Kendall came up with this amazing line at the end of it, which is,
"This war will end. And how we face it in here will make all the difference when it does."
Yeah, that's a line that kind of came to us while we were on set. We been working on that scene. We knew there was something that we still needed to work through and to really put across what Frank was going through and kind of sum up the journey for all of them. Experiences can make us or break us, and how we face our challenges, how we face adversity, how we face the darkness in this world at times will make all the difference when the sun comes back up.
We are led to believe that this was the last war where right was right and wrong was wrong, and we knew where we stood. There's a wonderful expression, you know. War doesn't determine who is right, it determines who is left. And the thing about it is that we have this sense that, we knew who the bad guys were. We knew what we were fighting for. Now, I think it's far more complicated than that. And it's when people come together and try and tell stories like this that hopefully, we'll be reminded of our common humanity.
And a story like this really just accentuates what the true power of music is. It can bypass emotional upsets, it can bypass language barriers, it can bypass fear and anger and just cut through it. It's like the universal solvent. It can just cut right through and get down to a basic thing, the basic humanity of what seems to bind us together. And this story is just a perfect example of that.
It's such a beautiful symbol, this violin that he's crafted. even in the face of everything that's going on in the world, you know, even now, in the face of all of this suffering in the world, we need this, we need music, we need art, we need these kind of things. I think that's what people will take from the film, and I hope that's the kind of message that comes across.
Master Sergeant.
I think the core message of this movie is to find the common things that we share as human beings, no matter what political regime we're a part of, or what our physical circumstances are, or our family circumstances. There are ways that we are the same, and to see those and to connect through those and to accomplish something great together is, I think, one of the beauties of life.